Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Covert, and I would like to welcome you to this week's pre-concert talk with Maestro Larry Loh, as well as our principal bassoonist Rachel Koeth and our principal bassist Spencer Phillips. Larry, take it away.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm so excited to get to talk to both Rachel and Spencer for a portion of our time before the concert because you all are participating in really it's like the centerpiece of this program because we're celebrating the Beethoven 250th anniversary this year, and we had a whole season planned where we were going to do all these giant works of Beethoven throughout the fall. And because of pandemic and because of suggestions from musicians like yourselves, one of the pieces that was suggested that came up many times actually is the septet. And so maybe we'll start with Spencer. Spencer, there are not that many chamber music works by Beethoven. In fact, I think this is the only one that has your instrument in it. Can you tell us a little bit about what the listeners can expect and what it's like from your vantage point to play this magnificent piece?
Yeah, it's our only chamber piece by Beethoven, so it's pretty special to bass players. We look forward to playing it, and it's always interesting to go down to one and a part because usually we're playing all in unison as a section. So it is fun to just have one bass player playing. In this case, it's a little bit unique with we don't have a typical quartet bass. We have just one violin, one viola, cello, and bass. So it really is a unique setup that way for the strings. But as a bass, your role still is always similar to that of the orchestra. We do lay the foundation, and Rachel and I have a lot of complementary parts when we play together. But it's very nice to be able to with one apart. You go with the phrases a little differently, and you catch different way the musicians want to play their melodies or their phrases. So it's nice to have a little bit of freedom in that regard.
Yeah, so it's a multi-movement work, and you listed four of the string instruments that are also playing. There's also a French horn, clarinet, and bassoon. Rachel, tell us a little bit about this piece from your perspective. Have you played it before? Is this your first time performing it?
Yes, I've played it actually 2 times before, and I love this piece. This piece was kind of like a gateway piece to playing other larger chamber works, like afterwards, like Schubert Octet, other wonderful works. And I love this piece because I have like little motives that I get to echo and then join up. So often something will happen in clarinet, and then I'll kind of echo that, and then we'll both play it again. And so it's really like playful, and I get to pop in and out of the texture. So I'm mostly a supporting kind of blending role, but then I have a few moments to shine.
Spencer, you're talking about some of the ways that it's different to play in chamber music as opposed to playing in a big section. And could you just describe a little more about that? Because, one of the things that people say in the orchestra world is that we should play it like it's chamber music, so everyone is always kind of having that chamber music feeling when you're playing with other musicians, no matter how big the ensemble is. Maybe can you elaborate on that aspect of it, and what are we trying to strive for as an orchestra, and how does playing in chamber music complement that?
I think there's 2 parts to that. I think the freedom is what you're trying to accomplish, that if someone wants to, you're always conscious of what the other parts are. And a lot of that's from studying scores and knowing the piece. But there is some specifics. In the case of the double bass, which is really all I have to worry about, when we play in a section, in Symphoria's case, we have 4 double basses. So it's everything times 4. So if we both play, if somebody's marked legato, which means play it full and longer, if we play extremely legato each individually as a section, it might sound muddy. So you sometimes take into account that you have, in my case, 3 other people playing the same part. So I might play a hair shorter, so I don't lose any pitch definition or articulation. But in chamber music, when you're one and apart, you are what it is. So you can get right to the, as exactly as you want. And it's a little bit, you approach it different that way, like what the end result. You're always playing to the back of the hall, but the means by which you're doing that changes from the orchestra versus by yourself.
So this is kind of a good opportunity for me to talk to some of the string and wind principals in the orchestra about what it's been like for us this fall to play in this setup, and then also what it was like, what it's like to perform this septet. The viewers at home should know that this has been recorded in advance. It's the only piece that will not be live, and that's just because the setup has to be completely new between the full orchestra works on either end of the septet. So to keep the musicians safe, we have to do this. But Rachel, from your perspective, playing in the orchestra and then getting to do this, and I'm not sure, I don't think that did you have barriers between musicians? Because I didn't watch okay, so no barriers, but what is it like to play in a way that you're so far apart from each other and you need to communicate? I know that there are challenges that this orchestra has been really great at tackling as a whole. It's not been without its challenges, but just to tell us a little bit about some of the things that we have to overcome as musicians in this completely new setup and what it was like to perform this all spread apart.
Well, one of the challenges is you have to play louder, so the distance, you can be heard through that distance. That's, I think, one main part. A second part is all the gestures that normally, if you're sitting right next to one another, you can pick up on, like the pulse really easily, but when you're spread out across the whole stage, then you kind of need really large gestures to catch what the tempo is. So I say those are some obstacles, but it feels really nice.
Do you mean like physical gestures? Sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Physical gestures.
Yep. Yeah, cues.
Right. Breaths, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So this work, it's different than a symphony because it's multi-movement, but it's not just the four kind of standard movements. It's set up almost like the serenades of the past. Mm-hmm. And since this is an earlier work by Beethoven, I think it's a great glimpse because we played the Seventh Symphony, which is a late middle period Beethoven. This is an earlier work. It has a lot more ties to that classical period from which these serenades were so prevalent. I imagine it must be so fun to play that kind of style with, this is music that was written by a composer that was really trying to change the genre and try to find new ways to express music that had been already established by these great composers. Just tell us a little bit, Spencer, why don't we start with you, just in like the style of this, because I know you've paid a lot of attention to these sorts of details about style, because we talk about the way that you're bowing certain things in the section to go with the style that I'm trying to indicate from the podium. I'm sure a lot of those decisions are made by you individually in this way, and just tell us a little bit about what we can expect from an earlier work of Beethoven.
Well, historically, this is it was premiered in 1800. So on the concert, we had a Mozart symphony. On the premiere, it was Mozart symphony. It was an aria from Haydn's Creation, Beethoven Piano Concerto. It was the septet in the middle. And then he went on to do another duet from the Creation. He improvised, and then he closed with the premiere of Beethoven 1. So this was the center of that concert too, and that was a long concert. But historically, you can see Haydn's Creation was composed about a year before. So and Mozart had died 9 years earlier. So you have to keep that in mind when you're performing it. We do tend to get a little heavier in a later Beethoven, and maybe a couple more spikes of rosin. But I in my mind, I associate it with Beethoven's first, which many people put into the classical era.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have just run out of time, and we need to move on we're going to get to talk to Peter Rabinowitz, our program annotator, about the rest of the program. So Rachel Koeth and Spencer Phillips, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to your performance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and now I'm very pleased to welcome Peter Rabinowitz, who is our program annotator. Peter, welcome.
Hey, Larry, it's great to be here. I gather you were just talking to Spencer and Rachel about the Beethoven, and actually I had a question about the Beethoven. This is being performed by the players themselves. without a conductor. What's the difference in what happens in a piece and how it's performed, how it sounds when there's no conductor present?
Besides the rising level of happiness for the musicians.
Well, that's important.
Well, okay. So what happens is when you have a large ensemble and you have a conductor, the conductor is the primary overall interpreter. Even though everyone is doing interpretations, if you were to take, let's say, the Dvorak 7 and have no conductor, you would have, if we have 60 people on the stage, we could have 60 different ways to go, 60 different tempos. Right. And so all those people would have their own interpretation, and the overall, what the audience would get would be more cacophonous, a little more watered down. Maybe the least common denominator would kind of come through, and when you have a conductor, then they can make certain decisions that the musicians themselves may disagree with or agree with, but they'll just go with it. And so with the septet that they recorded, they were able to make a lot more of those decisions themselves. And because of the number of musicians, they're able to do it without a conductor, even if socially distanced as they have to be.
Yeah, okay. Well, it'll be interesting because I know that when you get down to 7, 8, 9 players, you always have a choice. You could do it with a conductor or without. And I'm really glad to see something without a conductor there, not because I want to not see you, of course, but because...
No offense. You're right.
I think
so,
the idea...
No, I was just going to say, I think if it's possible for them to do it without a conductor, I always go with that. You know, like personally as a listener, I find that sometimes there's a little more of that kind of communication between musicians that's really, really obvious and exciting. So I do love that. And so I'm glad they're doing it. Peter, I'm so glad we do these chats together. I do want to ask you, like around the house, do you wear your corduroy jacket? You know, I always see you in that after concerts on the Zoom. I feel like you sleep in it. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, that's actually, no, this is actually most of the time, particularly since I don't go out of the house at all these days, I walk around in a ratty sweatshirt of one sort or another with, frayed cuffs. The only time I put the jacket on now is for these interviews because this is the closest thing I have to going to a concert. But this is what I always wear to concerts, partly because Pam really likes this outfit. I don't know. She always says something.
So if you want to see his ratty sweatshirt with the tattered sleeves, write us in on the chat right now, and maybe we can convince him to wear that next time, so we can see the real Peter.
That's right. Really do it. Okay. Well, going back to the Beethoven and the chamber music, this year we've been inserting chamber music pieces in the middle of concerts that normally would not have chamber music in them, partly because, or largely because, we're trying to protect the players at the time of COVID. But I'd be interested in whether the audience finds this combination of large ensemble pieces and small ensemble pieces on the same concert something that they really enjoy and would like to see us continue in one form or another when we're all back in the hall together. So if people want to write in on the chat or send us emails or something about whether this is something positive in and of itself or not, that would be really great. Anyway,
I will throw in my two. I was just going to say my 2 cents is that during a normal season, it would be very rare for us to have the opportunity to perform something like Beethoven Septet. So I think one of the blessings in disguise is that we are forced into thinking about our programming and thinking of creative ways for us to fulfill our mission of presenting this great music and also keeping the musicians as safe as possible, avoiding a lot of extreme stage setups like we had to in order to have this performed. And then out of those challenges come programming these wonderful gems that we don't normally perform.
Yeah, well, it really is, exciting to get to hear the Beethoven. But anyway, it is surrounded by 2 big orchestral works. And the first one, I'm really excited to have this piece by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, who is a composer who maybe many people in the audience have never even heard of before. He was, at the turn of the century, that is around 1900, one of the most prominent composers in the world. He was a British composer of African and British, mixed African and British descent, and was extraordinarily popular. His big piece was called Hiawatha. There's a section of it called Hiawatha's Wedding, which was performed all over the place, particularly in England. Unfortunately, he died very young. He worked himself to death. He lost a lot of money by bad choices. The piece that we're playing today is one of his lighter and slighter pieces, but we figured it was a great way to introduce you, the audience, to him. And it also worked very well with Dvorak because one of the people who tremendously influenced him was Dvorak. He was in the United States for a while, not, around the time that Dvorak was here, and he liked Dvorak's idea of taking folk music and turning it into, using it as a basis for classical music. But of course, this Dvorak symphony is not one of those folky, symphonies, either American folk or Czech folk. So I'm wondering as to how you feel about this symphony. I gather this is your favorite of the Dvorak symphonies.
Well, so you know how much I love Brahms. So this symphony is very Brahmsian in its style. Like you said, it doesn't have the folk influences that we hear in the latter two more famous Dvorak symphonies. But this one holds a really special place in my heart. I love both, actually, 6 and 7, but 7 is the one that I've done the most of those two. And for me, the 7th is just enormously satisfying. It begins kind of ominously, and it ends in this really, really interesting way. So the build from beginning to end is just so satisfying harmonically. The scherzo, the third movement, has everything that I love about that sort of dance music that Dvorak is so famous for in his Slavonic dances, and has a lot of that influence in it. And it just, from beginning to end, is never ceasing to amaze me, and just how beautifully it's crafted and how satisfying it is to perform. It's, I think, much more challenging to perform than the last two symphonies. I don't think it's just because it's less familiar, but I think that there are rhythmic challenges in it, these cross rhythms, especially in the first movement, and the scherzo movement, where the orchestra has a little less to hold on to in terms of like a strong metronomic pulse. And so everyone has to feel the lilt or feel the rhythms in the same way. And so in my experience, it's always harder to put together than you would think. And then in the end, it's so much, it's very satisfying.
It's going to be a double challenge, of course, under the current circumstances, since everybody is separated both in terms of distance and by these plexiglass shields. You talk about going from the beginning, the darkness of the beginning, to the ending. And the ending is one of those things that has really puzzled people since this symphony was new. That is, how triumphant is it? How dark is it? Is this a moment of final success, or is this just a moment of defiance against the darkness? You have a sense of that?
Yeah, it has okay, so the very ending that you're talking about, where there's it's like a turn to major, from D minor to D major, and there's this pedal where the orchestra is just holding the tonic, the D, and it's like an organ playing a giant cadence at the end of some giant improvisation. And I always think of it as triumphant, because the melody just it winds its way to what I guess I think of it, this majestic, incredible finale. And there's no doubt that the audience will know it's the end. It's also one of those things where it's so obvious that we've reached we've reached the summit, and we don't go down, and we stay up there. That's kind of how it ends. Perfect way to end our program. Peter, I'm so excited we're finally doing the symphony here. I'm sure you were too.
Really looking forward to it. So thanks.
So when you watch the program, are you going to wear the?
Absolutely not. I'm going to wear my ratty sweatshirt.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks so much, Peter.